Cool.
Thank you guys all for coming tonight. I am excited to see some new faces here. I believe, is that Carissa from Oregon?
Yeah,
I
of course.
haven't met you before, but welcome
Thank
to
you.
our name meeting here. I'm glad to see you here, and some familiar faces, Orle, Kathy, Jenny, and Yogi. So Miley and I are going to tag team this a little bit. Miley's going to kick us off and talk about our proposed changes, and then I'm just going to talk about what you can find in the documents that we sent out and the next steps. So I'm going to hand it over to Miley, who's going to talk a little bit about our board restructure proposal.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay, awesome. Thanks. Well, good evening, and thanks so much for joining us tonight. For those of you who I have not yet met, my name is Miley Sullivan. I'm a longstanding member of the NAME board, and I currently serve in the role of NMEA rep as a liaison between NAME and NMEA. As a member of the NAME board, I've been working alongside a small group of other NAME board members on a subcommittee to consider some of the decade-long challenges that our board has faced with recruitment and retention, and furthermore, to identify potential solutions to promote organizational longevity and board sustainability. I'll just mention that we're going to go through sort of some of these proposed changes and sort of our reasoning why, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So tonight, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we've been working on over the past 6 months and propose changes to our existing board structure that I think will better support our organization. I'm also going to review our current board structure, our proposed new structure, and associated changes to bylaws and officers' duties, and then outline the steps needed in order to move forward with these proposed changes, namely that being a vote from all of you. Next slide, Jen. So as I mentioned before, but it's worth restating, our primary goal in this effort is really addressing the significant challenges we've had for many years in recruiting and retaining board membership. And since historically NAME as an organization and all of our affiliated activities and offerings are largely driven by our board members, this issue directly impacts our ability to provide opportunities to our members in a consistent and sustainable way. So this proposal aims to address what we believe are the barriers to board sustainability and opens up better opportunities for increased participation from new and interested members to on-ramp onto our board. Next slide. So before I dive into some of the details, I just wanted to call out the major changes being proposed that you'll sort of see throughout this presentation. So the subcommittee proposes the removal of president-elect and past president positions, the removal of chapter co-director options, the addition of at-large board member positions, the addition of a contracted executive administrator position, the redistribution of many administrative duties and remaining elected officers to other officers, at-large board members, and to the executive administrator, and redefining the terms of the elected positions to 1-year renewable positions, with the exception of the NMEA chapter rep, which will remain a 2-year term. So I think for context, it's helpful to understand what our existing board structure looks like. Jen is a digital goddess and has visually outlined this for us really clearly. So I'll have her go to the next slide. So this graphic represents our board structure as it operates now and what it's has historically operated for quite some time. You'll notice that we have a presidential chain with a president-elect, a current president, and a past president. Additionally, we have our secretary, our treasurer, NMEA rep positions, and then our 4 chapter directors, and often also 4 co-directors for each of our regions. Next slide. So what we found is that the entry points to our board are most frequently those indicated in green. So annually, we are looking at finding a new president-elect to then serve in a 3-year presidential chain term, or 3 terms, essentially. After that 3-year cycle, that person ends their president's chain term, and we found that that person then oftentimes cycles off the board completely, or just into like a lesser role, and we lose that institutional knowledge and energy that goes with them. Additionally, because we're trying to support up to 8 chapter level co-director positions, we're often trying to recruit for many of those positions as well. Our biggest challenge with board recruitment and retention seems to be that we're always trying to recruit new members, not just new board members, but new members to name into higher level and seemingly bigger commitment board positions without ever having had a chance to serve on or work with our board. So that's a huge barrier to entry. It often goes along the lines of, hi, please join name. We're a great organization. Also, can you please serve as our president-elect and sign yourself up for running an organization you know very little about for the next 3 years? I think a couple of people on this call have already experienced that, so I'm not making this up. The annual cycle of the President's Chain also doesn't allow for much to be learned or accomplished in the course of what ends up being a pretty short year before moving on to an entirely new role in the chain. We've also found it feels similar to finding replacements for our chapter directors and co-director positions. And I would say, although the turnover isn't as frequent just by nature of the position, it's not a chain, so people will stay in those roles. We don't currently have many official board roles that allow people to warm up or get experience working with us before assuming some of these director level role positions. And so as such, it's become increasingly more difficult to recruit people into these positions. Next slide. So this is what we believe to be a feasible restructure to address some of these aforementioned challenges. You'll notice that we remove the presidential chain, if you will, by doing away with the president-elect and past president positions. The president position remains with the idea that it continues to be an annually electable position, but that officers may rerun each year and be reelected until they or the board feels ready for a transition. Similarly, we removed the chapter co-director positions. So the director positions are still there, but the co-directors or the second person positions are removed, namely so that those roles can be opened up to serve more flexible needs of the organization. Next slide. So you can see with the removal of the 4 co-director positions, we essentially create 4 new at-large positions, with that option being of up to 6 total at-large members that can support the organization both at the chapter level and at the larger big name organizational level, sort of as needed. We also hope that these at-large positions will function as a great entry-level or soft launch opportunity to get engaged in our board without being overwhelmed with the task of a leadership role, or at least right off the bat. Next slide. Then as there's needed or desired movement to higher level positions, we then have up to 6 board members who have some exposure and experience and hopefully interest in moving into these leadership roles. The at-large positions also offer flexibility with skills-based involvement in other board committees and board-related needs that don't always get the attention that they need. You can kind of see they have the opportunity to move up into these spots as they become available. Additionally, I think a critical piece of this restructuring relies on the acknowledgement that historically most, if not all, of the administrative burden of running name has fallen on our president's chain of command. And with the continually cycling nature of these positions, many of those tasks often get lost or postponed in the transfer of responsibility and institutional knowledge. And then oftentimes those either, if not lost, fall to Jen. So to address this and to increase our efficiency and productivity as an organization, we're proposing the addition of a contracted executive administrator who would assume many of these cyclical administrative tasks of what was once the responsibility of the president's chain. So that would be to keep the wheels moving and the lights on, so to speak. This also frees up the president to focus more wholeheartedly on strategic visioning and supporting forward movement of the organization. So along with much conversation and thought around this restructuring, the subcommittee then needed to see where the rubber hit the road to sort out what actual changes needed to be made to the organization's bylaws to put this all into action. So we did that. And now Jen is going to walk you through a little bit more of an overview on how and where you can take a look at some of this more detailed information.
Excellent. Thank you, Miley. That was fabulous. A great overview of our proposed changes. I'm hoping this will work seamlessly, but it might not. This is just a an image of what our proposed bylaw document looks like. But I'm hoping, can you guys see the actual document there? Did it switch over? Okay. So this is the document that was linked in the email that was sent out today. And I will also link it to the email that I will send out right after this meeting. So this is a reference that you can look through and actually see the nitty gritty of the bylaw changes that we are proposing. The way this document is laid out, on the left, the two columns are the numbering and the current bylaws. The next two columns would be new sections based on the new numbering and the proposed language for any changes. If there's nothing in this column, in the fourth column, that means we're not proposing any changes to those particular bylaws. I've tried to highlight in yellow the changes, and in the final fifth column, there's the reasoning for the change. And so as you go through the document, you can see any language that we've changed and the reason that we have given to change it. Just for example, in that first block there in row C, what we had to do is go through the bylaws, and anytime a duty was given to one of the positions that we're eliminating, like past president or president-elect, we had to, as a committee, decide, okay, so if there's no past president, who is going to do that function? And so that's where we've made, we had a lot of discussion about who would take over these responsibilities and how we would divvy them up. And then we've changed the bylaws accordingly. So any listing of officers reflects that new board structure that we showed in the diagram that Miley spoke of. Occasionally we made some, excuse me, some wording changes because it is a very specific and onerous task to amend the bylaws of an organization. We figured that while we have a captive audience, if you will, of people looking at our bylaws, that we would update just some small wording and numbering layout stuff to make our bylaws easier to read, make them more clear, make them keep up with the times of, we've moved into a digital world. And so some of the things were still listed as like, you know, old fashioned snail mail, stuff like that. And so some of these changes are small changes to update and refresh the bylaws. But most of them are as a result of specifically looking at these position redistributions. Anything that's highlighted in red, that was something that we took out altogether, and either it's accounted for somewhere else, or we like this one, for example, in section 5, this talks about the automatic succession of the president's chain, which is irrelevant now since we no longer have a president's chain. And I think they're pretty self-explanatory. I think I'm gonna leave that. I'm happy to answer any questions about that, or if anyone has any questions to talk about, like, oh, well, what did you decide to do with that? I'm happy to go through anything specific, but I'd like to move on to the duties of the officers so that you can see that's a similar document. And then we'll ask for questions at the end. So the duties of officers, what we did is that sometimes our bylaws and our standard operating procedures, our SOPs, are two documents that have, the SOPs especially, have grown over the years, and the duties of the officers are listed in both documents. And so this document here is an amalgamation of both of those documents with specific duties of each of our officers and where they're listed in those documents, so that we can have this as a reference, so that from this we can take this and create almost both an onboarding kind of like manual for new officers, and to create a document that we can use to promote and recruit board members, just by, you know, having a real concise list of what the officers actually do. And so I'll take you to that document there. And so on the left, you can see the document from which each of these duties is from and the specific clause in that document. And then on the right, it just lists the duties of each officer. And some of them are like fairly simple, and some of them are more specific, and it just depends on whether they came from the SOPs or whether they came from the bylaws. And then you can see that we have taken out most of the recurring administrative tasks of the president, and what's left in the office of the president is, like Miley said, that bigger picture, that working with the board to maintain the institutional knowledge and to make sure that the organization moves forward from year to year. Secretary, treasurer, chapter directors, the NMEA representative. The two positions that we added, well, there's two positions that we added and one that we needed to add just for administrative stuff. So the at-large members of the board of directors, they just have two basic duties here. Those are those nice open positions that we're hoping to recruit people who have an interest in the board, but without any specific duties, we're able to utilize them wherever they can serve the board best, which I think is really great with those positions. And then this executive administrator, all of these duties came from other board positions. So this is the stuff that other board positions used to have on their plate, which is now part of this contracted executive administrator position. And what if these proposed changes are approved by the membership, the board will then meet again and then take this and put it into like contract language for the executive administrator and create a small position for a contracted executive administrator who's basically going to do like the legwork behind the organization, record keeping, filing, annual stuff like that. And so it's hopefully going to take some of those tasks away from other board members and make it more desirable to stay on the board long term. And then the last thing at the bottom is a registered agent, which is just something our organization needs because it's registered as a 501c3 in the state of Oregon. We just need to make sure that we always have somebody who is a resident of the state of Oregon to serve as the organization's address. And so that's that last thing here.
Awesome.
So were you going to do this one or was I going to do this one? I can't remember.
I can do this one.
Okay.
And then you can do the next one. Awesome.
So I'm going to pass it back over to Miley, who's going to kind of recap everything and give you a really succinct like summary of what you're voting on.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate diving into the weeds a little bit. So hopefully after what I am thinking is making this as clear as possible, I want to revisit sort of why we're here today, which is that we need our membership to vote on this so that we can move forward accordingly as a board. So to review, this is what we're asking you to vote on. And the language is specifically this: do you approve the amended name bylaws as proposed at the special general meeting on May 28th, 2024? That's right now. Yes or no? And that includes removal of the president-elect and past president positions, removal of the chapter co-director options, addition of at-large board members, addition of a contracted executive administrator position, and then redistribution of many administrative duties of remaining elected officers to other officers, at-large board members, and executive administrator, and then redefining the terms of the elected positions to one-year renewable positions, with the exception of the NMEA chapter rep, which will remain a 2-year term. All right, next slide.
Cool. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the next steps because as kind of the administrator behind NAME, a lot of this will come from me. So after this meeting, we're recording this meeting, as you know, and after this meeting, we're going to send out an email with an electronic ballot, and everyone will receive a link. All current NAME members who are eligible to vote will receive a link to this recording the proposed changes in the bylaws, the duties of officers, and an overview of the proposal and our rationale for making these changes. You will also receive a link to vote, and the platform, the online voting platform that we use is called Question Pro. And so that will likely be who the email is from. And so you'll want to keep your eye out for an email from Question Pro to vote on the name bylaws. After we send it out, members will have 45 days to submit the votes, but we encourage you to do it right away. It's one question. It's super easy to finish. And then if the bylaws changes are approved, the board of directors are going to meet again after that 45-day time span. And they will, at that point, they'll discuss and approve the new SOPs, the standard operating procedures, and create the executive administrator contract. And then at that point, NAME will hold elections for officers and the new at-large board members at this summer's meeting. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat. Kathleen, I see your question, and I will we'll answer the questions after this. And so I will hold your question, hold that place until we open up the floor for questions. So that is the next steps. And then guess what? Now it's time for questions. So we would be happy to answer any of the questions that you have about anything that we've talked about tonight. The new board structure, the proposed changes to the bylaws, duties of the officers, or next steps. And so Kathleen, I'll go ahead and start with your question. And Kathleen's question was, will eliminating the co-directors discourage anyone from accepting the position? And we did talk about this in our committee, and what we came up with, what we decided was that with all of these at-large board members, it gives a more flexible entry point. And if one of those at-large board members wants to assist with one of the chapters, I think that leaves more opportunities for that. And so if someone wants to focus on a specific chapter, that's something they're totally able to do as an at-large board member. But what we have found is that when we have an optional co-director, those are the spots that get filled in. And therefore we have 8 people in that chapter director bar, and no one else is working on anything like membership development or conference committee, stuff like that. So there's a lot more that needs to happen on our board than just the chapter directorships. And so we're hoping that with the support of the at-large board members, that we will be able to recruit people for those chapter director positions. It just won't be the only thing that we can recruit for, if that makes sense. And I don't know if that answered your question, Kathleen, or if you have any further questions, we're happy to discuss that. All right,
Kathy's hand was next. Kathy, if you want to go ahead. Yeah,
it's Yogi.
Yeah.
Oh, Yogi, go ahead.
Kathy, I think, has gone over this a few times. So I had the same question as Kathleen, is, if the co-director is optional, I mean, we've certainly been in a position where, say, a person says, I'll be a director as long as you can be a director with me at the chapter level. So no, they're unwilling to be the only ones. And then, how the sharing works is, of course, another question. But
yeah, for sure. And I think,
I mean, it's optional. I don't know why it would want to be eliminated. I
think that we decided to eliminate that position because it becomes unwieldy to have the president, secretary, treasurer, and NMEA rep, and then 8 chapter reps, and then 6 at-large positions. Like, I think that we're trying to streamline the board makeup while still leaving it supportive for everyone who's on board. And so I think what I would say to people who are hesitant to be a chapter director would be that there are 6 people who are at-large board members that you can draw from for support. Like, there's definitely going to be support for you, and hopefully one of those people is also from your chapter, or if you know somebody that's from your chapter, encourage them to be an at-large board member, and then you can team up organically to work on that chapter. I don't know, Miley, do you have any other?
Could I
Yeah,
add
thoughts?
something?
Oh, go ahead, Kathy.
I'm just thinking in the BC example that we have a bunch of at-large members as well. And those people are usually willing to come up to the plate to help with those sorts of situations.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I just add on to that, Kathy, that I think hopefully what we're sort of level setting as an entire board is that, just because you're in whatever elected role you're in doesn't mean that you are free from supporting your own subchapter, right? Like, I think that we need to move in a direction of, okay, like I'm the NMEA rep, but that doesn't mean that I'm not, filling in as needed with the Washington stuff that's happening. And I think that a lot of that sort of happens organically, but I think, that's something that we can be really explicit about and just say like, hey, if you're serving in some of these like more big name roles, like the expectation is that you're still also serving your regional chapter as well. And, I think that that's just the new norm that we need to set as we move forward.
All right,
Jenny?
Jenny?
So I think this one's already been answered a little bit, but I just want to clarify, since Hayden was hollering in my ear at the time you were explaining it, so the new structure would be having one state director, one chapter director, and that in general, the roles of that haven't changed. It's just we want to have it be one person and have the at-large support as a role, right?
That is correct. So it would be one person identified specifically as the state or chapter director from that region, with the support of additional at-large members who may also be from that region. And so it's just a way to like kind of like list things out a little bit differently.
Yeah. So then my follow-up to that is, I've been hearing a lot of different like things that the at-large board members could do, and it may already be in the information that you sent out, which I have not gone through entirely, but is there a sort of like choose your own adventure kinds of things that are listed out of like, here, you could be on a communication committee, you could help one of your chapter directors with X, Y, and Z kind of tasks, you could help with like all the various things. Is that existing or on the plate to be created as we do those at-large board member positions, just to give them a bit more, especially as an interim position? Like,
absolutely, for sure.
And
that is definitely on the plate for development. With once this has been approved, that was our hope, is that kind of making a more robust list of stuff that you could focus on if you were an at-large member. And so like giving people suggestions and opportunities and options, like, and especially with like finding out what people are excited about and what they want to focus on. And that might be the chapter, and it might be something else. It might be, grants and development, like who knows what people's strengths are. And so that was kind of the hope of these at-large positions, is getting a diverse board that's working on a lot more robust stuff.
that's great. I think definitely we've tried doing recruitment in the past, and I've been a part of some of that, of like, giving the what would you like to do question is difficult without examples, because they usually don't know enough to really not create a new project that is great and amazing, but then diverts us from a whole bunch of other things.
For sure.
Cool.
And Kathleen added in the chat that perhaps one at-large member per chapter for support. And that would be a fantastic goal, but the reality of it right now is that we can't guarantee who's going to, like, we've had struggles recently even filling positions from some of our chapters. And so right now we just want to encourage more board participation just in general. And so I think that would be a goal, is to have at-large members that cover each of the chapters. But I think at this point, our board is so bare bones that we just need to open these positions to just encourage participation in general. And Yogi, is your hand still up or up again?
It went back up.
Okay.
I was wondering what the relationship is between this and NMEA structure. And if there's a specific structure, say, within the chapters. So I think BC is probably is registered society, isn't it? So it has all these documents as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So NMEA and NAME were formed about the same time back in the 70s. And I believe they both used the same model when they were started. And so NMEA still currently uses that same president's chain, president-elect, president to past president, that NAME has used. But what NMEA has that NAME hasn't had is director positions in addition on the board. And they used to have 9 director positions, which are basically the same as the at-large members, kind of like a non-specified board member. And they have recently upped that to 12 director positions. So they kept their president's chain. They haven't switched away from that. And they have these 12 director positions. But I will point out that this board recruitment kind of like problem is happening to organizations across the board, and NMEA is also having trouble recruiting president-elect this year. And so even with their similar board structure, they're filling their director positions, and then hopefully those will kind of percolate up into the higher levels of the executive board.
But structurally, NAME is independent of NMEA. I mean, there's an agreement that, you know,
Correct.
we're members, but
Yeah. And each chapter is set up however they want. Like each chapter is totally separate. And Orly's question in the chat is why only 1 year? By the time you learn, you're out. But that we're hoping that people don't leave after 1 year. We're hoping that we have structured this such that the tasks that you have to do during your year of service are such that you would get reelected. We are hopeful that people who finally get into these positions will continue to be elected year after year. For example, Miley has been the NMEA rep for many years and is continuing to do that. And so that's kind of the hope, is that we will find people who enjoy these positions and enjoy working on the board and helping guide the organization, and then don't re-elect every year. The 1 year, the change to 1 year on my end was an administrative one. We have to run the election every year anyway. And so to me, it's a way to check in with everyone and say, hey, you still good? You know, are you happy to stand in that position? And then that gives people the chance to say, yeah, I'm good. You know, I'm in it for another year. Or actually, you know, my job has changed. My life has changed. This isn't working for me right now. I actually need to step down. And so I think just checking in with people and making sure that it's still a commitment for them, I think that's important, because as we know, things change, and we want to give people the chance to cycle off the board if they're not willing to commit for that, you know, that next term. Then we want to make sure the board is active each year.
I would still say you should have, it should be 2 years, just because when I was president, I finally learned how to do stuff at the end of my term. And then I was, you know, post-president, and I helped the next guy, and I couldn't have done anything if somebody hadn't been there to help me. And so that pre and post, that's really critical. But 2 years would have been really helpful, because by the time I learned what I was supposed to be doing, I was out. Although on the other hand, everybody's really busy. And if given the option, I would say, oh yeah, I only want 1 year. But if it's 2 years, I would have happily done 2 years. So I would just advocate for 2 years. But if you only want one, you know, it's worked in the past. So why not stay with it?
I think
Oh,
I'll
wait,
respond to
one
that.
last thing that I didn't mention. There is no, we have officially a communications committee and a communications director. So that's been completely eliminated, which is good, because I never did anything. And when I tried to do something, it really I didn't think it was working very well. But maybe we still should have somebody who sort of oversees communications I don't know.
Yep,
Just-
that's in the
Yeah,
SOPs,
yeah.
and that will be addressed by the board after this. So this meeting here and the general membership meeting is just focusing on the bylaws, and the committees aren't part of the bylaws. That's part of the standard operating procedures, and so those discussions will be for the next board meeting when we look into the SOPs, for sure.
But that kind of stuff is in there too. Like
Mhm.
we've started thinking about all that.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
communications is one of the
Absolutely.
things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. It doesn't do away, it's not doing away with any sort of,
yeah.
those are all SOP like
Mhm.
committee chairs and stuff like that. So,
Right.
and I'll just sort of circle back to Orlay's comment about the 2-year position. I think in my mind, Orlay, the intention is actually to try and recruit people who are willing, as Jen said, to stay in the role longer than a year. I think it literally, that's just, it's actually so that we don't have like sort of unofficially term limits, if you will, right? So that because the president's chain was a term limited position. So that's exactly what was happening in that president's chain, is that like, even though you had 3 years, you know, president-elect, president, post-president, it was still the roles for those jobs were really different. And so you're having to learn something for exactly the point that you just said, right? Like that it's happening so quickly and then it's over and you're like, oh, well, I just figured out what I was doing and now I'm on to the next position. So the idea is that we're hoping to put someone in that role that even though they're getting voted in year out, that they can sit in that position for like, that they're comfortable in it. They can sit there for, 3 to 5 years if they want. And, but that they're not signing up for that and stuck in it if that doesn't work for them. Right. And in the meantime, we have a really strong sort of executive committee that's supporting that, so that then when that person's ready to roll off, that there's people who are like, okay, I understand the role. Like I got this, we're not trying to recruit somebody who has like no idea what they're doing. Right. That they've sort of been in this sort of higher level leadership role and they're ready to sort of fill in. So yeah. Other questions? Okay. Yeah, Jenny.
Oh, Jenny?
Yeah, I was just thinking, if this gets approved, then is this going to come into effect at the conference is when we switch over to things as sort of our new calendar year?
Yeah, so
what are the
I
next
can
steps you
answer
think
that.
approved?
Yeah, so if this is approved, so 45 days from now is about July 15th. And so that's when the vote will close. And that's enough to give enough time in our bylaws to make a change. It has to be after a certain number of days once we introduce it. So after that, the board of directors is going to meet. And I think at that point, it's probably going to look like that will be a big chunk of the summer board of directors meeting, is looking at those SOPs and the executive administrator contract. We're going to hold, if it's approved, we would hold elections for the new board structure this summer. And our hope is that we can introduce this new board structure at the conference in Machosen and hopefully recruit in-person people at the conference who are, excited to maybe join in those positions. And so then we will have the election beginning at the conference and then lasting for 30 days after that. And so the election itself will probably take place after the summer conference in August, but we'll use that momentum of like, hey, we just created this awesome new board, kind of doing that in-person, face-to-face recruiting and making sure that we, explain like what opportunities are available and start recruiting at the summer meeting. And then the board would take effect after the election. So probably in early fall is when we would look at the new board taking effect. And our current president, Jessie, has said that she is willing to stay in the office of president until the new board is elected and in place. And so she knows that might extend her term for another month or two. And she says that's okay with her, as long as, we're moving forward to elect the new board. Any other questions? Yeah, and Jenny says it keeps the momentum and energy of folks after they attend the conference. That's what we're hoping. All right. So the last
Looks like Kathy
thing
has
oh,
one more
Kathy
question.
has another
Or
question.
Yogi.
Okay, or Yogi.
I just wanted to say thanks all of you for the huge effort you've put into this. It sounds great, and hopefully it'll make a difference. But
We hope
it's
so.
a lot of thought, a lot of work you've put into it. Thanks very
Yeah.
much.
And
Thanks,
the
Yogi.
health of the health of the organization has been topmost in our mind. Like, we want what's best for NAME, and so we're hoping that as a committee we worked really hard to see what that might look like. So we hope that we've done a good job in presenting it clearly and answering any questions that you have. We do have an opportunity, if anyone is ready to vote, we have an opportunity for you to get that out of the way right now. You can just scan that QR code and click on your answer. I will also, after this meeting, be putting together, like I said, that email with links to everything so that you can look through it if you wanted to get a closer look at anything. And then the vote will also go out, and that will be an email ballot where you'll get a link in the email to click to the survey on Question Pro and cast your ballot that way.
Jen, did you say the email was going to come from Question Pro? Like, should we warn our members that that's gonna
I
happen?
think I found a way to send it out from our NAME email address,
Okay.
so I think it should be fine, but the link will go to Question Pro. Just
Okay.
we wanted to mention that to make sure that if people see that it's an external link, that's exactly what they are supposed to be on.
Okay.
So, all right.
Thanks everyone for being here. It's really nice to see some familiar faces, and I feel like this is like the most participation we've had in one of our meetings in a while. So that's how we have to get people here, is they were making big changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're excited about this, and hopefully we really think that there's a lot of people out there that I think would be interested in being part of this awesome community and board, and we just have to like create pathways for them to willingly join us. So this is what we had in mind to sort of get some new energy into the board.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right, I'm going to stop recording so that we can send this to our members.